Now for the France 24 debate, the curtain rises Friday on the Winter Olympics in Sochi. Already, the reviews are in.
We are on the eve of the Sochi 2014 Olympic Winter Games. We can see that you, Russia, and the Russians have delivered.
Everyone is glowing. It's the most expected games ever, 5 times more than Vancouver 4 years ago, more than the combined cost of Brazil hosting both the World Cup and the 2016 Summer Olympics. The corruption, mismanagement, displacement of residents, environmental impact will all be forgotten when the athletes hit the ice and the slopes, you say. Perhaps. Or will these games come back to haunt Russia's president and those who chose Sochi? Will they ultimately strengthen or weaken Vladimir Putin's hand, both domestically and on the broader foreign policy issues like Ukraine and Syria? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Putin's games. And with us from Sochi, correspondent Shaun Walker. In Moscow, we're pleased to welcome Andrey Kortunov, Director General of the Russian International Affairs Council. Joining us here in the studio from the Russian service of Radio France International, Elene, thank you for being with us. And Andreas EVAGORA, Deputy Head of News at Eurosport. Thank you for being with us. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and on Twitter, our hashtag F24Debate. Now, to begin this edition, the Russian president, he's in Sochi. He's been there for final inspection, you might say, that came just ahead of the arrival of the flame this Wednesday. And he thanked the members of the International Olympic Committee for their trust.
We understand it was not an easy decision to make, to grant the right to host the Games in a city which back then barely had 10 to 15% of the infrastructure required. But you placed your faith in our potential. You placed your faith in the Russian character, which doesn't flinch from difficulties, and that unites us.
Doesn't flinch from difficulties. Shaun Walker, you're in Sochi. How big are those difficulties?
Well, I think there's two things that strike you when you look at the Olympics here. The first is just how much has been done. It's really quite extraordinary that, you know, in a city where 5 or 6 years ago none of these things were here, none of these stadiums. Rosa Hutor, the mountain area, which now resembles a kind of mountain village. There was nothing there a few years ago. So all this stuff has been built up from scratch, and some of it's quite impressive. But I think it's also an issue that with all this infrastructure being built so quickly, a lot of it's not finished. Certainly the hotels, there's been a lot of problems. We've seen all kinds of people arriving to find that their hotels are just a mess. And of course, more globally, that issue of corruption in the build-up, issue of abuses during the construction here, I think those are all things that worry people looking on.
Shaun, every Olympics, put this in perspective, every Olympics, before the games begin, there's talk about the infrastructure. Are the journalists perhaps being unfair since there's no sporting events to report on?
Well, I think you're right, and certainly in the run-up to the games, there is, as you say, always that feeling. We see it even with the European Championships in Ukraine last year. We see it with the World Cup in Brazil. But we are now talking 2 days before the games. I'm speaking to you by telephone with a horrible echo because I can't talk to you by Skype because my hotel, which is one of the main media hotels, doesn't have internet, which is, of course, an issue if you've got 300 journalists trying to file their stories and they can't do so. Obviously, it's not a terrible hardship. It's not some awful thing, but it is a little bit poor that this giant sporting event and journalists don't have internet. So there are these issues. I think in terms of the actual sporting infrastructure, it looks very impressive. The stadiums do seem to be ready. I was up in the mountain area today. The ski runs are ready. But there are these signs that all of this has been done very quickly. I was talking to somebody who's been involved in a lot of previous Olympics, a foreign contractor, who said if the Russians had decided to host us in 2018, we would have had time, everything would have been fine. But 2014 was just too quick. There's no way you could build the kind of infrastructure that in the Alps it took 3 or 4 decades to build in 3 or 4 years.
Andrey Kortunov, we don't have Andrey Kortunov yet from Moscow. We'll hope to have that connection soon. Elena, SERVETTAZ, how do you think these games are going to go?
And listen, I'm very sorry for Shaun. I could not imagine how I would work in such a condition without internet, without anything. And today I read an article about foreign journalists who discovered their hotels with no hot water, with no electricity inside, no connection, nothing. And also maybe you've been...
But again, will the wider public care once the games begin? Because at the end of the day, they don't care about whether the journalists have hot water in their rooms.
Well, you think they do not care if... I don't know, there is too many issues. There is not only the story about journalists, but we've heard a lot about people being displaced, dogs killed, political prisoners. So, and everybody's saying, okay, this game going to start. Of course, we will not speak about this after games are over. But this is a moment to speak about it.
Andreas EVAGORA, looking back at previous Olympics, how does it rate in terms of the build-up?
It's equally as chaotic as they all are. As you mentioned earlier, before every Olympic Games, every World Cup, we get the scare stories. It's always all right on the night, and I'm sure this will be the same. I mean, in terms of journalists not having their equipment ready and so on, I think it's important to think about who's the constituency for President Putin. I was in Russia in July for the World Student Games, which were opened by the president, and I didn't get the impression that the views, how can we put it, of the liberal West are particularly high in the priorities of the organisers. We've talked about who's not going to be at the opening ceremony: the President of the United States, Prime Minister of Britain, and François Hollande. But who will be there? The President of China, President Xi, will be there. The Prime Minister of Japan will be there. So I think if we look at it more globally, it's not quite as negative for the Russians as some might have us believe.
We're pleased now to welcome Andrey Kortunov of the Russian International Affairs Council. Andrey, thank you for being with us. At the outset, Shaun Walker was telling us how he spoke to one contractor who said, if only there had been more time to prepare. Do you feel as though it's been a little bit too much of a race getting ready in time for the games?
Well, I'm not sure, frankly, because I think that whatever time they might have had, they would still do it in the very last moment. And I think that one of the problems for Russia is that it nearly lost its capacity to implement large-scale, major, complex projects. And so the Olympic Games is definitely one of these large-scale projects. And maybe people around Putin are doing their best, but it's not a trivial task.
Are you nervous on the eve of the Games in that regard? The whole world will be watching Russia.
Well, I'm personally not particularly nervous because I know that there'll be mishaps, there'll be problems. But at the same time, I'm almost sure that whatever happens there will be described as a major victory for Russia, as a major victory for Putin. And I agree that though some prominent political leaders from the West decided not to come to Sochi, but still we have quite a representative group of leaders from all over the world. And moreover, it is not, at least I wouldn't be surprised to find out in the end of the day that Russia performed quite decent, if not very good during the Olympic Games. It seems that we are not now, today, the country is much better prepared to get high scores than it was 4 years ago.
High scores, you mean sportingly, or high scores in terms of being ready and prepared?
Well, I mean, in terms of the number of gold medals that Russian athletes can get, it's difficult to speculate right now. But what we receive, what information we receive from our sport authorities, so to say, suggests that probably the overall performance of the Russian team would be quite good.
Now, the performance is one thing. We heard Andreas EVAGORA, some remarks from the new boss of the International Olympic Committee, who criticized Western leaders for what he called grandstanding ahead of these games.
It was, in many ways, a remarkable speech because he was far more direct than his predecessor had ever been, Thomas Bach. He was basically saying that politicians are hiding behind not going to the games. There isn't an official boycott, but we talked about the leaders that are not going, and it's pretty obvious they're making some kind of statement. And Thomas Bach was saying exactly what you're alluding to. He's saying, if you have a problem, come out, talk about it in the open instead of making this kind of veiled protest against the Olympic movement. And for a head of the IOC, that was very controversial.
Elene, SERVETTAZ was mentioning a moment ago all the problems that have befalled the area itself. On the one hand, great infrastructure projects, but at what cost for the residents near the ski venues at Rosa Couture? The start of the games means they're finally going to get a good night's sleep. France 24's team traveled to the area.
This is Rosa Couture, at the foot of the ski slopes. This village has sprung from the ground in just 3 years, at a cost of €1.5 billion. Yves Damier is a French former skiing champion. He now advises the Sochi 2014 organising committee.
What's been done here has been done very quickly and in a beautiful way. I'd say that the result here is as good as those we have in the Alps. There's very good infrastructure, and all this has been well integrated into the natural surroundings of the Caucasus.
But is it really possible to build in 3 years what took 4 decades in the Alps without serious consequences? We've come around 30 kilometers from Rosa Couture to meet Anna, here by the side of the road. Anna is a journalist who's been investigating the tons of construction waste from the Olympic sites, which is being dumped here illegally.
We succeeded in bringing a representative from the Regional Environmental Ministry here. We wanted her to explain what was in these piles of concrete waste. But when she came, she stood on a pile of waste and said to me, "I don't see any rubbish. There isn't any."
It's hard not to see. Tires, aerosol cans, insulation foam, all discarded here, despite this sign. We're in a water protection area. On the same road, we pass 2 quarries created to extract the stone needed for the Olympic building sites. The diggers operate day and night. The noise is deafening. The residents of the neighboring village of Haxie have to live with it.
We can't sleep. And it's not just for a night or two. It's been 3 years that we haven't been able to sleep.
Do you see a future for yourselves here?
I don't know. We'll probably fall sick soon and die. All this dust which the quarry throws up is very dangerous. It's quicklime dust.
The new road, the one that cost $9 billion, passes just below the village. The mayor's office had promised that the residents would have access to the road. Plans for the necessary work have been drawn up, but that's all.
We've been left without running water and without a road for 4 years. We're not engineers, but we can understand that we're going to be cut off from everything. It's not a village here anymore.
And then there are the trucks.
Do you see the traffic we have here?
Which make the houses shake each time they pass. While land prices might have exploded elsewhere, here it's impossible to sell. Everything is covered in dust. Zaven, the village elder in Haxie, can no longer sell his fruit. They're now too dangerous for consumption.
I don't think Putin knows what's going on here. It mustn't reach him. When the construction for the Olympic Games began, he ordered that the rights of the local inhabitants be respected. So, okay, I understand the Olympic Games are important and about the prestige of the state. But quite frankly, it's tough for us.
With the Sochi Games, Vladimir Putin hopes to show off a new Russia. He's been personally drumming up publicity, at photo calls sipping mulled wine and skiing, and giving outspoken interviews. Here, few people doubt the 2-week games will pass off successfully, but it's what comes next which worries them. Sochi has become a free-for-all, a more or less lawless area. What will happen to it once the Olympic flame goes out?
What will happen after the Olympic flame goes out? Shaun Walker, you were telling us at the top that you today toured around Rosa Hutor. What struck you when you were there?
Well, it does look very new, and it has all been built. And the ski areas, as I said, look very impressive. I mean, you know, I think we have, as you've said already, we do have to put this into perspective. There are these concerns before every major sporting event, and obviously when you've got a construction project on this scale, there are going to be people who are displaced. There are going to be people who have problems with their homes. And I think perhaps the question is more how the authorities respond to that, whether they put a decent contingency plan in place and so on. And I don't think that's happened here. Just going back to one thing that one of your guests said in the studio, that Putin doesn't really care about what the Western media says. I'm not sure that's fully true. I think Putin probably doesn't mind getting lectures on gay rights and so on, brush those off. But I think it's very, very clear from the start that this Olympics has been about Putin and Russia putting on a show, showing that Russia is really capable of hosting this kind of event, that it's not some sort of second-rate country, that Russia can put on a major, major international event. They spent $51 billion to do that. So I think when the people that are going to write about that event and are going to present that face of the event to the world, when they arrive, they find, you know, hotel rooms without water and without roofs. Yes, in the scheme of everything, it's a small thing. But when you spend $51 billion to project a particular image, it's a bit of a silly and a bit of a poor oversight.
All right. Very briefly, Elene SERVETTAZ. There's the agenda of domestic public opinion and world public opinion. Which matters more at this particular juncture to Putin?
It's the same for everybody. For Vladimir Putin, of course, he cares what people think around. And more people today are speaking. You've been mentioning this road, $9.5 billion. This road was constructed by Yakunin, and now we're speaking about that he started to build his own property there. So we will discuss this case. It looks like realtors say that his properties cost like $75 million, and according to his last declaration, his salary, his income is $1.5 million. So this is another issue, you know, where all these people take money. So, of course, we will discuss all this.
All right, where the money has gone, one of the issues we'll discuss when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.